So let's discuss the subject of AI and consciousness and your latest research on it.
Yeah, well, I've got a book coming out. Actually, it's virtually out now, called The Dream, in which I go deeply into AI, but not just AI that we know,
Mhm.
but AI that operates out of other dimensions of reality. Because, I keep saying this because it needs to be appreciated that when we look out into the world, or we think we are, we're seeing only a fraction of what there is to see. We're seeing a tiny band of frequency, which they call visible light. And visible light is a smear
Mhm.
of the electromagnetic spectrum. And according to mainstream science, the electromagnetic spectrum, never mind visible light, is 0.005% of what exists in the universe. And I've seen it as estimated as high as 0.5%, but it doesn't matter, it's tiny. So the point being that we can only see a fraction, tiny fraction, of what we see or in the space that we're looking at. And therefore, the almost entirety of infinite reality exists outside of the human visual channel of frequency. And therefore, when people say, if there's non-human entities manipulating human society, why can't we see them? Well, that's why. They overwhelmingly operate outside of human sight in other dimensions of reality. And if you go to any kind of ancient culture or religion, if you break it down what they're saying, it's always occurs to me that it's not the differences that stand out, it's how much common theme there is between them. And one of the common themes is that there's a non-human force manipulating human society. I mean, the Christianity will call them demons or Satan, and you've got the jinn in Islamic belief, you've got the archons in Gnostic belief, and so it goes on. So the question is that I had so many, I still have many, is how does that force manipulate humanity? And in the just after the turn of the millennium, I said that this reality is a simulation, a virtual reality simulation, and that we are attached to it via the body
Mhm.
and the senses, the five senses. We are actually decoding it in the same way that a computer decodes Wi-Fi, and it takes Wi-Fi, a radiation field of information, and it puts onto the screen of the computer that information or part of it in a completely different form to how it appears in the Wi-Fi field. And so when you look at the way we construct reality, we are actually taking a waveform information field, we're turning it through the senses into electrical information, which communicates it to the brain, which then decodes it into holographic digital reality, which is the apparently, but not really, external world that we believe that we're in. And so my question was, how does this whole deal get orchestrated? Because it's obviously not someone sitting there pressing buttons. And I've gone deeper and deeper and deeper in the rabbit hole, and deeper than ever before in The Dream, the new book, which, I mean, there's stuff in there that's never been written before. And it's taken me into another dimension which interpenetrates and interacts at one level with this one, which is known in esoteric circles as the astral or the fourth dimension. And, you can tend to think that another dimension is necessarily ethereal in nature. And from our perspective, from our point of observation, if people expand their minds into this other dimension, it may appear to be ethereal because it's on a different frequency to us. It's like a ghost will look ethereal because it's on a different frequency to us.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were on that frequency, if you were in the astral and on the astral frequency and interacting with it, then in many ways it would be as physical or appear as physical as this reality. And what I go into in the dream is how in that reality is a level of artificial intelligence, AI, which makes even the cutting edge that we see of human artificial intelligence to be effectively the Stone Age. And I describe in the book how this reality and what we call human life is actually being manipulated by artificial intelligence, astral artificial intelligence. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as I've looked at the different spiritual beliefs, whether they're religious or cultural or whatever, there is another common theme, there are so many, which is that, I mean, the Eastern religions all talk about this, but so do many others, that to become enlightened, in other words, to see beyond this reality, to understand beyond the limits of knowledge in this reality, you have to breach the mind. You have to go on beyond the mind. The mind is the barrier to enlightenment. That's what we keep being told. So my question was, okay, I can go with that. So what's the mind? What is the mind? What is this mind, this barrier you have to go beyond to become enlightened?
Mm-hmm.
And I describe in the book how I say that this mind is actually AI. You see, the thing is that people think that the biological is natural because they're comparing it with the technological.
Mm-hmm.
So they say that's technological, that's natural because it's biological. But you know, my question to that is, how do you know? All right, you're comparing it with the apparent human technological, but how do you know that biological is actually natural? And the more that I've, you know, been on this journey, it's now 34 years now, the more it's become clear that this non-human force, or to this non-human force, the biological is a form of technology. And therefore, this biological computer, the body as I call it, is a form of technology, but beyond anything that humans have ever got close to. And so what I'm saying about the mind, the human mind, is that it's an AI program. And if you come into this world with that AI program and you do not expand beyond it into consciousness, beyond the mind program and beyond the simulation program, then pretty much your life is laid out from start to finish. And when you're going to leave this reality will pretty much be known when you arrive. The unknown force, and this is what is happening to more and more people, is consciousness, where you open from the limitations of the program and the influence of the program that's constantly telling you how to perceive reality into levels of consciousness beyond the program. And that's what we call awakening. When people say I'm awakening, what they mean is they're awakening to consciousness beyond the program, and therefore many things start to happen. First of all, you see the program, and secondly, you start to see the world in a completely different way and from a completely different perspective.
Mm.
And for me, this is why, I have over the decades, I've done the names, dates, places, information, the World Economic Forum, the Bilderberg Group, and all of it, this global cult, as I call it. And that needs doing, and I still do it, because we need to know what's happening at the point we're interacting with this manipulation. But it's not going to change unless we go beyond the program and start to not only perceive beyond the program, but act on what we perceive. Because a programmed people, a mind program, AI, astral mind program people, as I call it, they take two forms. One is that because the mind is driving the mind program is driving their reality, they don't question authority. What authority tells them, they just believe and act upon and are subordinate to. Then you've got another group who are starting to, they're more conscious, and they can see that what they're being told by authority is not necessarily the truth, and they'd rather not do what authority is telling them. But the program is still there, and it plays out as, yeah, but what are the consequences for me of not going with what I'm told? And if you look at history and tyranny, those two states of mind have been responsible for every tyranny in history, because fascism and communism is not brought in and imposed by fascists and communists because there's never enough of them. How those tyrannies and others happen is the population's acquiescence to fascism and to communism. So, for instance, there's apparently 8 billion people in the world. Well, a relative handful, and that's what we're talking about, can't dictate the lives of 8 billion unless 8 billion people just acquiesce to what they're told they should do, or what they're told they should be, how they should behave, what they should think. And so you've got the third group, and this is the awakening group. This is the group that's awakening from the program and starting to see, but not only starting to see, they are awake enough to realize that they have to stop acquiescing. It's no good standing on the other side of the street saying, see what's happening next. I'll tell you what they're going to do next. This is what they're going to do. See, I told you. So how is that different from someone not knowing what's going to happen next? Because you're just standing there pointing it out and feeling, proud of yourself. But what are you actually doing to impact upon that unfolding human society? Well, basically nothing. The third group is that which can see it and will not acquiesce to it. And that's the group that's ended every tyranny in history, because in the end, what it comes down to is self-respect. Do I have the self-respect not to just believe whatever I'm told? And do I have the self-respect not to do what I'm told, even though I don't want to, because I fear the consequences? And so the awakening group, which has got bigger and bigger since COVID, when a lot of this stuff went there and people couldn't deny it anymore, it's bloody happening, man. They're the ones that are, that's the group that will bring this down. And that's the group that has to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And in many ways, I've said over the years, it's going to have to get really bad before we turn this around.
Yeah.
Because as we saw with COVID, there's so many people now who are awake to levels of this dystopia that they wouldn't have seen before because of COVID. Had COVID not happened, they'd still be fast asleep. And so the more this moves on, and it's becoming more and more obvious now, especially with the digital concentration camp that they're building. The more it goes in people's faces, the more chance we've got of bringing it down, ironically, so long as people have the backbone and the self-respect to stop acquiescing and stop cooperating with their own enslavement and their children's enslavement and their grandchildren's enslavement. Because this is really I know many people have said this over the years, and maybe they've said it over the centuries and what we call history. This is a pivotal point in human history. Well, it is, because if this digital concentration camp is imposed, for instance, where all money is digital, and as is now possible, that digital money is programmable, which means they can dictate how it's spent and how it isn't spent. You want to buy a book that's challenging the system, well, your programmed money won't buy it. We are at this pivotal point, and the next few years, up to their P year, it seems, of 2030, to have all this in place, are going to be very, very pivotal years in the longer term future of humanity.
David, you know, my awakening actually took place in 2020, just like many people, as you said. And I'm being half Tanzanian. I went back to Tanzania to help the tribe. And Tanzania was the only country that did not go into lockdown until they have removed the president Magufuli. When I say removed, I mean gone.
Yeah.
So, and it shook the whole country because the country did not want to participate in any jabs or none of that, none of that. And he left one of the biggest legacies, and Tanzania until this point remained one of the lowest countries to participate in a global experiment. So I have this feeling that the awakening took place because of leaderships that were there, but there was very few. There was very, very few out there.
There's very few, because to get to a position of, say, political power,
Mm-hmm.
you need the support of enormous amounts of money, and you need the support of the media, in effect, to a very large extent. You need the support of these institutions that this global cult controls. And that's why cult front men and front women tend to end up in positions of power. You know, at the moment, we've got Biden in America, we've got Rishi Sunak. Before that, it was Boris Johnson. We've got a guy in the wings, the opposition Labour Party leader in Britain, called Keir Starmer. He will be dystopia on steroids if he comes in. You've got Lula in Brazil. All around the world, you've got these front people for this cult. But whatever, the number of people in a country is dramatically far exceeding the number of people that are calling the shots. And I say again, the only way that few can impose upon the many is if the many acquiesce to the few. And that's been going on throughout human history. Look at a war. What is a war? It's people who never see a gun fired in anger telling their young men and women to go and fight the war. And it's someone on the other side who's never seen a gun shot in anger, certainly if I'm talking in the West, who sends their young men and women to fight the other young men and women who, if you put them round a table, would probably get on fine. But they're fighting each other. Why are you fighting each other? I mean, the classic, the absolute classic was in the First World War, when they had fighting in the trenches in France, and they had a ceasefire on Christmas Day, and the two sides played football in no man's land. I mean, and then the next day they went to start shooting each other again. I mean, this is insanity.
Mhm.
But that level of following what authority tells you is how we got into this mess. And in terms of Africa, I think a lot more people are aware in Africa than many other parts of the world because of the exploitation that's happened.
Yeah.
And it's part of the story, really. It's part of the story that I tell, because this global cult is a network, a global network of secret societies. It has what I call the spider in the center of the web dictating the whole thing. And then it has all the different strands, the secret societies, semi-secret groups, and organizations we know, World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, Bilderberg groups, and World Economic Forum, governments, banking systems, corporations. They're all part of this web. If you go deep enough in a corporation, you'll hit that, like someone like, any major corporation. To take Facebook, if you go deep enough in Facebook, certainly to the level of Zuckerberg, although he's not the real force behind it, you will meet that point where Facebook meets the web. You get Google will at one level will meet the web, and Google of course owns YouTube. And so you have, for instance, Facebook, YouTube, Google, all these different Silicon Valley corporations who have censored the COVID story and COVID information in line with the World Health Organization's version of COVID, which is a bunch of lies and absolute hoax. And the reason you've got that uniformity of censorship on behalf of the World Health Organization is the Facebooks and the Googles and the YouTubes are connected to the same web that created the World Health Organization. So you've got the big pharmaceutical cartel, your Pfizer's and your Moderna's, etc., producing the jab, the fake vaccine, and they go to government agencies like the CDC, the FDA, the MHRA in Britain, the regulatory agencies, so-called. And you know when they do that they're going to get permission to use their jab because these agencies are ultimately controlled by the web, and so is Big Pharma. It was created by the web, not least through the Rockefellers, as was the World Health Organization. So everything is connected in that way, and in looking at the history of this and how it came about, you can go back to ancient Babylon and Sumer. You can go back further, and other parts of the world. But that's a good point to pick it up, and you can follow this this cult through to the Roman Empire, going up into Northern Europe and becoming the powers that became the European countries. And of course, what happened when the European countries were in place is colonization. And so you look at these European countries, not least the British, of the British Empire, on which it said the sun never set. They went right across the world, whether it's the Netherlands or Britain or Germany or Belgium or France, and they colonized the world. And then came and in colonizing the world, they took the cult across the world. And then you had this sleight of hand called decolonization. It's when apparently these former colonies were given, quote, independence. But what actually happened is that the cult left out in those countries certain bloodline families that serve the cult and the secret societies that serve the cult. And they've gone on manipulating those countries ever since. And so if you look in Africa, you had physical occupation, which apparently rolled back, didn't really, and it's been replaced by financial occupation and corporate occupation. But the same forces are basically still calling the shots. And this is one of the reasons I shake my head at organizations like BLM and the woke networks that support it, and the white billionaires from the cult that fund it,
Mm-hmm.
ironically. And you know, at the inner core of BLM, they'll know exactly what's going on, but the vast majority who support it do not. And that is that these cult families and these cult networks that they now serve, they're pushing the climate change hoax, they're pushing the COVID hoax, they're pushing all these different elements of this dystopia hoax, and they're pushing the racism hoax. And I say hoax because I think if you compared the attitude to black people and brown people and not non-white people now compared with the days of apartheid and the days of Martin Luther King and the apartheid that was going on in America, then I think Martin Luther King might say, well, it's just a touch better now than it was when I was marching through the streets. But the irony is, as I'm coming to, is that these networks that are pushing the dystopia and being supported by these organizations now that are pushing to divide non-white from white so that there's this divide and rule, they are the same networks and the same families that were behind slavery.
Yes.
The same ones. And so if you don't do research into this and you don't see how the thing works, then you're going to get played. I mean, you know, we've got your George Soros's and your Bill Gates's and your Klaus Schwab's at the World Economic Forum, and all these other billionaires of the cult that fund organizations like BLM. They couldn't give a damn about black people. They couldn't care less. Mm-hmm. All they want is divide and rule, and to divide and rule the target population so it's easier to control, because you get them to control each other by fighting among each other. And, you know, I would just ask people that support these things, why would old white men, which is what they basically all are, mm-hmm. why would they be spending billions to help non-white people? Why would the Soros organization be spending billions to open up the southern border of the United States and the borders of Europe? Why would they be doing that? Because they care about migrants? Are you having a laugh? They're doing it because they want to create chaos, upheaval, conflict, and divide and rule. That's why they're doing it. They couldn't care less about any of them. It's the last thing they could care about. And it's just shocking to me that so many people who support that and claim to be, quote, progressive have not seen the scale to which they're being played.
Yes. Speaking of South Africa, I just want to say I'm very grateful that you came to visit. I think in year 2000 or before, you visited Credo Mutwa, who is one of the elders.
Yeah, the late 1990s it was, yeah.
The late 1990s, yes. So he was he held a lot of ancient knowledge that has been removed because they removed many elders, and you know, during colonial years, they made sure to take out a lot of indigenous leaders. And can you talk us through what made you go all the way there, and what inspired you to meet Credo Mutwa?
It was well, there's a few things. First of all, Credo Mutwa said to me on one occasion about the British Empire, and Cecil Rhodes, of course, was a Rothschild asset that instigated the gold and diamond industry in South Africa. And he said, Credo, that they milked the mind. I remember the words he said. They milked the minds of the shaman and then killed them. They wanted to know what they knew, but they didn't want anyone else to know it. And this is very indicative of what I've been writing about over the years, because in the end, the stadium in which this whole thing is played out is human perception. Human perception becomes human behavior. We behave as we do because we believe what we do, we perceive what we do. So they have to, as best they can, dictate the information that we receive. This is what all the censorship's about and what have you, and it's why they milked the minds of the shaman and then killed them, because there is knowledge about what actually I'm talking about. The fact that there's a non-human force manipulating human society, the fact that we're living in a fake reality that's being created to enslave what? To enslave what? Our perception. You must not know that, and you must not know what the cutting edge of technological possibility is. You mustn't know what the cutting edge of artificial intelligence possibility is, because then you won't grasp how you're being controlled and what by and to what extent. And so what happened is that I was invited to go and speak in Johannesburg and Cape Town. This is back in the 1990s, and it was like dreamland for me, because trying to get anyone interested in this information in the 1990s was very challenging. I mean, very challenging. And so I went, and it was organized by some people who knew what they were doing. I remember Winnie Mandela came to my talk in Johannesburg, and so the organizers said to me, "There's someone we want you to meet." And I didn't know Credo at the time or anything about him, and I met him. I remember he was dressed in this very white gown, and we were going to have a chat. "Hello, nice to meet you. Blah blah blah." Well, we talked for 5 hours, and that was the start. And I realized that he held knowledge from the ancient African accounts and legends and stories that fitted perfectly with what I was learning from the military industrial complex whistleblowers that I'd come across in America and so on. And so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, what you're telling me from these Zulu legends and stories is what these whistleblowers in the American, for instance, military industrial intelligence complex have been telling me. It's the same story. And when you are you're doing what I'm doing, and you're seeking out the cutting edge of what the hell's going on, then you have if you go into those areas where the evidence is taking you, you're going to find yourself coming across information that if you say it in the public arena, you're going to get ridiculed and dismissed. You're mad. The challenge is that you do it anyway. And after spending a lot of time over many, many years with Credo, it became obvious that there was an ancient and modern symbiosis of information and accounts. And of course, central to that symbiosis was the fact that a non-human reptilian race, not only reptilian, but that seems to be the dominant one, was behind, at least at one level, behind human manipulation. I was being told this by the military industrial complex whistleblowers in America, as I traveled America, talking to no one at the time, by the way. No one wanted to know, but I did meet so many people like that. And I'm being told the same by a Zulu shaman Johannesburg, and that was very compelling to me, and that juxtaposition of accounts was why I felt confident. I knew what would happen, ridicule and abuse, but I felt confident to go with it because um, it was a very compelling mixture of sources which told the same story. And Credo is just an amazing man. I mean, he's left us now, unfortunately, although thankfully he stayed with us a very long time.
Mhm.
And he had this ability. I guess it comes from the verbal passing of knowledge through the generations. But he had this, even in his 90s, he had this photographic memory of stories and names and history. And he did get very frustrated, I know, later in his life, but probably not later in his life, perhaps through most of his life, but certainly later, because he was seeing his own people being pulled towards the what I would call the Western mind program,
Yeah.
and out of the knowledge that had been passed through the generations. So it was like Nike trainers were more important than um, the knowledge of the world and how it's controlled and what we could do about it. He did get frustrated, and we talked a lot about that. But he was just the most amazing, amazing, amazing man who experienced things that are almost unimaginable. He told me one story um, when he lived in Soweto during apartheid, and a white newspaper ran a story that linked him to the government. The story was completely inaccurate, and it was just a way of targeting him. And he said what happened is that a mob came after him in Soweto, beat him senseless virtually, and then poured petrol on him. And there's a guy about to light it when someone in the crowd, it must have been someone in authority in that area, said stop. And otherwise, there would have been no Credo after that point, obviously. And it is kind of, it's not just a story that can't imagine what he went through. It's also a story that's so indicative of how easy it is to manipulate people. So, and as I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about it, how it kind of symbolizes what I've been talking about. You've got these old white billionaires funding BLM and other such organizations, not because they care about black people or non-white people, but because it suits their agenda to divide and rule the target population. And people go with it, and they talk about racism, they talk about racial inequality, all this stuff, and they talk about white supremacy. And then you go, but it's old white men that are funding it. And then you look at the Credo story, and here you had a white apartheid newspaper making a claim about Credo that absolutely wasn't true. And the mob, who the white newspaper would have absolute contempt for, goes for Credo on the basis of what the newspaper said. So it's almost depressingly, painfully easy to manipulate people if they don't have the ability to just say, hold on a minute, this is the question, This is the question we need to ask all the time.
Hmm.
Who benefits from me believing this? Who benefits from believing all the woke stuff and all the racial conflict stuff? Anyone who wants to divide and rule the population. Who benefits from the white newspaper saying that about Credo? Anyone that wants to destroy Credo Mutwa and stop him being listened to by his own people. You know, it's, if we keep asking that question, who benefits from me believing what this system and authority is telling me to believe? And invariably, it will be anyone that wants to divide and rule us, anyone who wants to frighten us, anyone who wants to centralize power justified by what they claim is necessary to overcome some problem they say they have but don't, like human-caused global warming. We must centralize power and have complete control to save the world from human-caused climate change, which is not happening. But you know, I've said over the years many times, one of the greatest human diseases is naivety. It's naivety that makes people fall for these things. And Credo Mutwa was not naive. He was, in his own way, he was a bloody genius. And it's a pity more people didn't listen to him.
Yeah, you mentioned something about division, and I saw the matryoshka to the left of you. It's this toy I grew up with. It's part of the Ukrainian and Russian culture that
Oh,
I,
over there.
yeah, over
Yeah.
there. So, and I grew up with these toys. You know, you open one, there is
Yeah.
another. So there's this never-ending cycle. And
That's why I put it there, to symbolize
yes,
the way the cult works. Because, as you rightly say, if I took the top off of that, there would be an exact replica smaller inside. Top off that, a smaller replica inside. And that's how it works until you get to the tiniest kind of doll,
hmm,
and that's the inner core of the cult. What you're looking at now is symbolically human society. And as you go deeper and deeper and deeper, you eventually come to the smallest doll inside that. And it's that's the inner core of the cult, and it's calling the shots. But it's not, because it's unseen, people don't realize.
people don't realize, and especially as being someone part of the Ukrainian culture, there is so much division that takes place now. And finally, only now in the communities, people will start to wake up. There was a time when some of my friends will reject to even speak Russian because of what's happening. And finally, they will only speak Ukrainian. And finally, people start to see things. So if you can say a few words about the division that takes place from above, how it's manipulated from that end.
Well, I mean, if you look at the Ukrainian situation with Russia, there is a handful of people compared with the population of Russia that's pushing one way, and there's a handful of people compared with the population of Ukraine that's pushing the other way. But they're not doing the fighting. Population's doing the fighting, and it's doing the dying. And the other thing is that you look at Vladimir Zelensky. I mean, he's not running Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
He's a comedian.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a very funny comedian, but he's a comedian. And he's being run by oligarchs around him in Ukraine. That's one level of the Russian doll, as we call them.
Mm-hmm.
And you go deeper, and he's being run by America. And then you go deeper, and the cult that's running America is running America, which is running the oligarchs, who are running Zelensky. This is how it works. And you know, I've said many times since the late 1990s that the plan is, if we go with it, to bring East and West into conflict and to move the power center of the world from the west to the east.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked about in the late 1990s the plan for a third world war, bringing together Russia and China against the West, with other countries, probably including India and certainly Iran and countries like that. And the plan was that China would, the China Russia alliance would be the victors. And what you're seeing in Ukraine is not a war only between the Ukraine and Russia, it's between the West and Russia, China, really. And, you know, I've said over the years, going way back, that if you want to see what's planned for the West tomorrow, then look at China today. And it's my contention that the Mao Revolution in China was a global cult revolution. And for this reason, to create a basically a walled off country that could, within its dictatorship, develop relatively quickly and incubate a system of mass control, not least using technology and AI. And the plan was, once it was perfected to a certain level in China, it would be played out across the world. And if you look at what's happened since the COVID hoax was played, apparently out of China, they tell us, more to know, then the Chinese system has increasingly impacted upon the West. In China, you have this social credit system where if you do what the government wants, you get credits. If you don't, you lose them. And if you lose enough, you can't go on trains, you can't go on planes, you can't interact with mainstream society. That's exactly what they are moving towards in the West. And so if you look at many levels of this, you look at what's happened in terms of global production and supply and the supply chain. The global corporations, not least based in America, and again, you go deep enough in these corporations, you go deep enough in these governments, and you meet the web of the cult. So the cult controls China, and it controls the Western corporations. So what have they been doing? They've been outsourcing supply of basic goods from the West to the East and China. So China now has massive control of the supply chain around the world. I mean, the antibiotics in America basically come from China. You are seeing this, we must have green energy. It's not green at all, with wind turbines and solar panels. Well, where are most of them being made? They're being made in China. And China is being handed all the aces. You've got the fentanyl crisis in American society, killing hundreds, thousands of people, and it's coming from China through the Mexican drug cartels through an open border into America. You've got TikTok, which has massive Chinese connections, which is infiltrating Western society and causing upheavals and misdirection. And if you look at the TikTok version in China, it's nothing like the TikTok version in the West. So in all these different areas, China's being handed the aces. And now, because of the situation with Ukraine and Russia, China has got closer and closer to Russia. The sanctions on Russian energy has led China to become much more a consumer and a buyer of Russian energy, you know, and you see the way the global cult operates, literally globally, by how Western countries, not least America, do things that harm the West. You see, this thing about it's the West against Russia, it's the West against China. Well, only on one level it is. If you go to the next level, they're all the same entities. So from that level, this global cult doesn't want Europe to have a cheap supply of energy. It doesn't. And it certainly doesn't want Europe to have Russia as a supplier of its energy. So when that was happening through the Nord Stream pipelines, what happened? Quite clearly, if you read the work of Seymour Hersh, but more than that, the United States, in league with other European countries, blew up the pipeline and cut off potential energy supplies and gas supplies to Germany and thus to Europe. Now, if you were America representing the interests of the West, you would never have done that, which has pushed up energy prices and inflation and all the rest of it. But if you are being controlled by that level above countries and regions, which doesn't play the country game, that's the borders of countries, that's just for public consumption. At this level, there are no borders, there are no countries, there's just one global fiefdom. Then that's exactly what you want. You want to create a situation of dependency all over the world, and in this case, dependency and a potential loss of energy supplies, because that suits your agenda. And so while you've got the East and the West moving into a position of increasing conflict, that's only there. That's at the level we perceive the world in terms of Russia and China and America and Europe. But if you go to that level and the cult level, then the cult controls China, it controls Russia, it controls Ukraine, it controls Britain, it controls America, it controls Canada, it controls all these countries. And, you know, you talk there about Tanzania. When you have countries which somehow get a leadership that doesn't want to go along with it, well, that's why you find these people don't last too long, because they're taken out for various reasons, in various ways rather, by this global cult to stop any resistance to what they want. This is why if you look around the world, I remember writing books back in the 1980s about this concept of the threat of a good example, where you will have a regime or a government come to power somewhere in the world. It might be South America, it might be Central America, it might be Africa. And they are doing things in a different way. They're doing things to benefit the people rather than the cult. And it's the threat of a good example. That's what they're terrified of, because it's people go, hold on a minute. Have you seen the way they're doing things? Well, there's no hungry people there, is there? So why are we doing it? They don't want that. Mm-hmm. So you'll find that these governments that come to light or come to power that are pushing back against the cult and are doing it a different way, they're the ones that don't last too long. And suddenly, they're demonized, and you know, America often sends the troops in, sends the boys in, as they have over the decades, to shut that off. And this is why it happens. But it can only happen because of the acquiescence of the population to the view.
Mm-hmm. David, this has been very informative, and I just to wrap things up, I've been seeing this chart by David Hawkins about levels of consciousness. You've probably seen it as well. And
Yeah.
how can we wrap it up together just in sake of elevating the consciousness? Because I believe that when we start elevating ourselves from anxiety, grief, and loss into a higher state, to positivity, I believe this is where the greater awakening happens. Just any sort of tips, any recommendations, anything that's been helping you personally to elevate your vibrational state?
Well, I always look at things a bit different and
Hmm.
from another angle. For instance, people say, "What's the solution?" But I'm not interested in solutions, because if you look at human history, solutions usually lead to more problems, which require more solutions, and so the kind of cycle goes on. If you've got something you don't like,
Hmm.
then the way to remove it is to remove the cause of it. What is the cause of this? Because if you remove the cause, its expression, its consequence must disappear, because it depends on the cause to make it manifest.
Hmm.
So, what's the cause? So, for instance, what's the cause of human enslavement? It's vast numbers of people giving their power away to the few. That's the cause. So you stop doing that, and the cause must lead to the outcome disappearing. So we can look at consciousness and awakening from the point of view of going to something else, kind of awakening to something else. Um, or we can see that we've always been the something else, and we always will be the something else.
Hmm.
The reason we're not influenced by it, by the level that we could be, and driven by it, and inspired by it, and getting our perceptions from it, is because we are caught in a dream.
Hmm.
Well, it's actually a nightmare, but we'll call it a dream.
Hmm.
Hence, the name of my new book is called The Dream. This is the dream.
Hmm.
And if you see, it's someone with a headset on,
Yes.
and the body is the headset. It's feeding us a sense of reality that all this is real. It's feeding us a sense of reality that everything is apart from everything else,
Hmm.
that you are one entity in and of yourself, and so am I. There's no connection between us
Hmm.
through this energetic field of consciousness, which is what we're all part of. And thus, it's not that we are not connected to that something else, infinite awareness.
Hmm.
We always are. It's what we are. But our perception, our focus of attention,
Hmm.
is dominated by the five senses, which are an expression of this simulation. It's how we interact with the simulation field. So it's a dream, and it's an induced dream. So it is feeding us a sense of reality which we are decoding, and it becomes our apparently experienced reality. It becomes our sense of reality. And it's very powerful because it's constant. You know, you see people, and they'll put a headset on for a virtual reality game, and they'll be thrashing around all over this place and screaming. They're in an empty room. It's a room like this, but they're screaming because what's being fed to them is dictating their sense of reality. And how is it dictating their sense of reality? It's hijacking, it's hacking in to the five senses and overriding this reality through the headset reality. So in these more sophisticated virtual reality games where you have the headset for the vision, you have the gloves for the touch, you have the audio for the hearing, they're all 5 sense decoding systems, which the virtual reality game is overriding and hacking into. And thus, this is the reality.
It's a dream
There's
within the dream. Dream within
something
the
coming
dream.
at me. What you can do with a
Mm-hmm.
headset, you can go, whoa,
Mm-hmm.
it's just an illusion. But the body, brain, AI astral mind, as I call it, is feeding you the headset reality your entire life. And through the AI astral mind, it's dictating your sense of reality. So once you realize that this is all literally an induced dream, and that we are something beyond it, we are not the body, we are consciousness that's been entrapped in this simulation. And you stop being pulled into it. You see, all the dramas of life, all the, oh my God, have you heard the latest? Oh my God, all these things we think are important. And a little bit further along the line, we think, oh, it wasn't really important, was it? No, well, why do you think it was important at the time? All these things are pulling us in. All the dramas are pulling us in to the dream.
Mm-hmm.
And once you stop, and there's many other levels to this, I talk about in the book, like, what happens when we leave the body, etc. The dream loses its power over you, because you start to look at the dramas which get everybody, and you just kind of look at them, relax, because it's a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And we can wake up from it anytime we choose, as long as we understand what it is we're actually experiencing. Because the worst thing you can do is believe in this world as a tangible reality, because then it's gotcha. And so it's not so much going somewhere, we're already there. People say, oh, we've got to seek enlightenment. No, you're already enlightened. You're just disconnected from that level of you that's enlightened by this. So it's like, literally, it's like taking the headset off and stop allowing this biological computer, AI mind, to dictate your reality. And when people have said, a lot of spiritual people say, if you just sit quietly and listen to your thoughts, you can become an observer of your thoughts, all this mind chatter that goes on. Oh, I said to her, and she said to me, and all this stuff. And they say, oh, you can listen to your mind chatter. You can. You can do that. So what's the mind chatter? What's the mind chatter that's constantly going on and on and on all the way through your life? That's the astral AI mind. And if you can take a step back and you can see it for what it is, that's not me.
Yeah.
That's the program. Then the program increasingly has less and less power over you. It's like, I've used pictures in my books over the years, subliminal pictures, where you have like an advertisement, for instance, and somewhere in the advertisement there is a subliminal image which the conscious mind cannot see, but the subconscious can. And that's what the subliminal's there for, to manipulate the subconscious to maybe buy the product or whatever, right? Or to be attracted to the advert, whatever. But you're doing it subconsciously. You're not consciously aware about you suddenly looking at this advert. What's fascinating is that you can show one of these subliminal pictures to people and they won't see the subliminal. And then you point it out. And from the moment you've pointed it out, whenever they see that picture again, the subliminal is the first thing they see. Why? Because what you've done is you've taken awareness of it out of the subconscious and you've put it into the conscious. Now you can see it. And because you can see it, it doesn't manipulate you anymore because you're aware of it. And it's exactly the same in what I've just described. Once you become aware of the nature of this reality, the illusory nature of it, the simulated nature of it, and it becomes conscious in the same way as the subliminal, it stops controlling your perception, stops controlling you. It stops being this barrier, this AI mind barrier between you and the real you. And so for me, that's the way to do it. It's basically like taking a headset off. It's like taking a coat off. You're just taking or bursting a bubble, whatever analogy you want. You are dealing with what's keeping you from connection. Rather than being obsessed with, I must connect, just get rid, delete what is stopping that connection, which once that's deleted, that will happen as a matter of course, because that's who you really are. So that's the way I would go about it.
Yeah, it reminds of that quote from Lao Tzu, when you know the other is wisdom, but knowing yourself is enlightenment. And I feel
Yeah,
like that's where we're going slowly. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this time. Thank you
no problem.
for being the source of awakening for decades and awakening people across the board. You know, as someone who is part African and part Ukrainian, Russian, I've seen you on both sides of spectrums. So it's been a great, great pleasure to spend this moment with you. And I'll be
Yeah,
sharing.
it's been a pleasure to talk to you. And we'll have to talk to your friend, your Russian friend, another time.
Yes, absolutely. We'll make it work.
Cheers.